All right, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity of speaking today. First off, a little bit about myself. Doug Thomas. Joined the Navy right out of high school in '84. Spent 5 years in the Navy, 4 years on the USS Samuel B. Roberts and the USS Lexington. Got out, joined the Coast Guard in 1990. I spent 3 years in Kodiak, Alaska, and then came to New Orleans in '93 and never left. Retired in 2005. Been here ever since. So, what brings me here today is the ship I was on, Samuel B. Roberts. I'm going to do a couple different presentations. One's going to be about the legacy of Samuel B. Roberts. And the point I want to get across is the impact that one person can have on life. And that person is Samuel Booker Roberts, Jr. So, at any time during the presentation, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and get my attention. Because I want it to be very interactive. This isn't just a lecture. So, presentation called "The Legacy Like None Other." No high honor was the motto of my ship, so that's where we get that from, and you'll find out in a minute. Samuel Booker Roberts Jr. was born in San Francisco in '21, joined the Navy Reserve '39, called active duty in 1940. Was killed in the Battle of Guadalcanal in '42. Both of his parents served in World War I, and that's sort of odd because weren't a lot of females that served in the Navy in World War I, but both of his parents served. He also had 2 brothers that served in the Navy during World War II, and only one of the 3 brothers returned from World War II. Most of you have probably heard about the Sullivans, the 5 brothers that were killed all on one ship. Well, they weren't all on one ship, but 2 out of 3 brothers were killed. One note is one brother, John Roberts, he was actually stationed on board the USS Samuel B. Roberts DE-413 when it was sunk in Leyte Gulf. A little side note, something I forgot earlier is, when he reported on board the Roberts, he went to the captain, and I mean, okay, this is the brother of the ship's namesake that he's on, and he's like, "Captain, I don't want anybody to know that I'm related to Samuel B. Roberts. I just want to be just another crewman." So no one on the crew until later on knew that that was the brother of the namesake of their ship. So in 1942, he was stationed on the USS Bellatrix. He drove a Higgins boat that was built right here in New Orleans. And he was a coxswain, so he helped ferry supplies to the beachhead. At one point, the ships had to withdraw because the Japanese forces were starting to overrun most of the island. He volunteered to stay on the island attached to the beachmaster at Lunga Point. Most of you have probably heard of legendary Marine Colonel Chesty Puller. Well, that's who was in charge of these Marines there. So there he transported Marines and supplies to different areas on the islands. On September 27th, basically all of the Marines were getting overrun, and they had all withdrawn to one point on the beach, trying to get it taken off. Japanese, every time ships or boats would come in and try to pick them up, Japanese would light them up. So what he volunteered to do was be a decoy. So he took his Higgins boat and drew the fire of the Japanese while other boats went in to rescue the Marines. Another person did that who was his officer in charge, and that was Douglas A. Monroe. Does anyone know who Douglas Monroe is?
He got a Medal of Honor for his actions on that beach.
What branch of the service?
He's Coast Guard.
Very good. He is the only Medal of Honor winner from the Coast Guard. So he was the officer in charge of this unit for Samuel B. Roberts. Roberts, after they rescued all the Marines, he was withdrawing, and that's whenever his Higgins boat got hit by a shell, and he died the next day. He was awarded the Navy Cross, and of course, also in charge, Douglas Monroe earned the Medal of Honor. They basically both got killed doing the same exact thing. The reason Douglas Monroe got the Medal of Honor is because he was also in charge of all of the Higgins boats, not just one of them. So the Navy named ship after Samuel B. Roberts was a Zoria Escort, DE-413. If you've been to the Kidd in Baton Rouge, the Kidd is a destroyer, so this is even smaller than the Kidd. So now you've got Samuel B. Roberts, and now you've got a ship named after him, DE-413. Fast forward to October 1944, the Roberts was assigned to Taffy 3 in Leyte Gulf. Their mission was to protect the 200,000 members of the invasion force of the Philippines, U.S. 6th Army. In 2016, they had their reunion here, and I was honored to actually meet these two members were part of that 200,000 invasion force. So, in late 44, the Japanese Navy had pretty much almost been wiped out. So they pretty much gathered all of their force and wanted to make one big, main battle and put it all in. So they wanted to stop the invasion of the Philippines. So their plan was to have a northern force, central force, and southern force. And Admiral Halsey was in charge of the fleet here. Well, Admiral Halsey's entire life, he wanted to command a battle from a battleship against other battleships and other carriers. The big battle is what he envisioned. Well, whenever he knew the aircraft carriers were up north, he took his battleships and carriers and went off after them. Complete decoy. I think they did have a few aircraft on the carriers, but they weren't fighters or anything. So it drew the 3rd Fleet north, which left the Central Force. There were 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 10 destroyers. So that's all of the 13 ships of Taffy 3. And then they had the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. It weighed more than all 13 of the ships of Taffy 3 combined. Central Force on October 24th, it was attacked by planes from the carriers of Taffy 3. So they really hammered them good. They were forced to retreat back out of the range of the planes. The battleship Musashi was sunk and many others were damaged. It was just the first blow in this battle. One of the legends of that force is Thomas Lupo. From New Orleans. He was attacking the Yamato on October 24th, and this is his, it's not his plane, but it's one just like that he flew in the World War II Museum in the Bowen wing of the museum. He was known because he ran out of bullets, but just like Samuel B. Roberts acted as a decoy, Thomas Lupo acted as a decoy. He kept doing bombing runs on the ships, even though he didn't have any bullets, just so they would fire at him, and other planes with bullets could attack. And he even threw everything, when he was doing his diving bombs, he threw everything out of his cockpit onto the ship. That's how, I don't know what you call it, that's how much he wanted to fight them. He wanted them to know he was there. So on October 25th, the Central First regrouped, and they came through the San Bernardino Straits, and they surprised Taffy 3, because they thought they had retreated completely. They retreated, the carriers, I think there were 4 escort carriers, and these are not big carriers like you think of World War II. These were basically like cruise ships that they put a flat top on and, hey, you're a carrier. So they started, as soon as the Japanese force came through and they saw them, they started retreating out of range of the Japanese guns. The Japanese commander thought he was up against Admiral Halsey and the 3rd Fleet. So, a couple of the ships that I'm going to mention, other than the Roberts, is the USS Johnston. It was a destroyer, just like the Kidd in Baton Rouge. It displaced 2,700 tons. The main ship that it fought against was the Kumano, which was 13,440 tons. The Roberts was 1,350 tons, and it really fought up against the Shikuma, which was 11,213. And of course, I already mentioned the Yamato. This is really just a glance at the size differential. Like the Johnston and the Kumano on the left, the Kumano was 5 times the size of the Johnston. The Shikuma was 8 times larger than the Roberts. And the Yamato was 8 times larger than the Kumano. That's how massive this battleship was. So when the carriers started leaving, there were 3 ships led by the USS Johnston that attacked. On their own. They didn't wait for any orders or any command. They just said, hey, we got to attack. So what they did is they started laying smoke so the Japanese couldn't see what type of ship they was. So the Johnston, it fought for a while valiantly, damaged several. I think it damaged a cruiser and a couple other ships, but it was just crushed by the Japanese big guns. Even when it was, damaged and couldn't even steer, it lost all steering. the captain still fought to the death. And he was awarded the Medal of Honor, and he had a ship named after him, DE-1023. So now you've got Samuel B. Roberts and DE-413 both involved in actions where the Medal of Honor was awarded. The Roberts Deer in action, they slugged it out for over 2 hours for the Japanese, and they really didn't think they would last 15 minutes. The captain told them over this loudspeaker system, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." And that's the ultimate, basically saying, we're probably all going to die, but we're going to take as many with them as we can. That's a picture of the Roberts earlier in October of '44. One of the main characters on the Roberts was GM3 Paul Carr from Oklahoma. The Roberts had 5-inch gun mounts, and he was the gun mount captain for this one. They fired 325 rounds in 35 minutes, and the barrel overheated and exploded, killing just about everybody in the gun mount. And Carr was found leaning up against the gun mount, begging someone to help him load the final round so he could fire his last round. He was awarded the Silver Star, and he was only 20 years old. So 2 ships were named for the captain of the Roberts, Lieutenant Commander Copeland, and GM3 Carr, the USS Copeland FFG-25 and USS Carr FFG-52. And the Navy also commissioned 2 additional ships, Roberts, DD-823 and FFG-58. In his after-action report, the captain wrote, "In the face of this knowledge, the men zealously manned their stations wherever they might be, and fought and worked with such calmness, courage, and efficiency that no higher honor could be conceived than to command such a group of men." And that's where we got our motto for FFG-58, was no higher honor. This past Veterans Day at the Victory Ball at the World War II Museum, we were finishing up, and I saw this gentleman with a hat on, so I talked to him. And he was actually on the USS Louisville, which is part of the Southern Force. So I actually got to talk to someone that was in Lady Gulf when the first Samuel B. Roberts fought. So that was a memorable evening. So now you got Samuel B. Roberts, you got DE-413, and then you got 2 ships named for people from DE-413. The second ship, Samuel B. Roberts, was DD-823, commissioned from 46 to 70. Even though it didn't have one significant event like Lady Gulf and my ship hitting the mine, it served in the 50s and 60s valiantly. His nickname was the Steamin' Sammy B because it was underway so much. A couple of his highlights: in 54, 55, it sailed around the world. In 56 and 57, ironically, it was in the Persian Gulf. 58, it was off Lebanon. In 59, it was one of the first ships to traverse all 5 of the Great Lakes. 63, it participated in the search for the USS Thresher, a submarine that sunk on its maiden voyage. 63, it was part of the Cuban Missile Crisis blockade. And in 65 and 66, it was off Vietnam, where it earned 2 battle stars and fired its guns in anger for the first time. So now you got Samuel B. Roberts, DE-413, 2 FFGs, and DD-823. And then you get to my ship, USS Samuel B. Roberts, FFG-58. It's commissioned in 1986, and it served the Navy valiantly all the way through 2015. One of the first things that our captain did whenever he took over the command of the ship was he knew the history of Samuel B. Roberts, and he wanted every member of his crew to understand that history. So this picture I was showing you before this is, I photoshopped it for this purposes, but the original painting was on the mess decks of the ship the entire time it was commissioned. And if you notice at the bottom it says, "In footsteps of brave men." So our captain knew the importance of a legacy. So these pictures here were actually at our commissioning up in Bath, Maine in 1986. And they were actual members of DE-413 that fought in Lady Gulf. And the picture on the left was at the decommissioning in 2015, and the gentleman in the middle was one of the few survivors of DE-413. So we had survivors of DE-413 both at the commissioning and the decommissioning. The plaque they're holding is another thing the captain did. Is he had this bronze plaque, and it's probably about the size of this table here, on the main deck quarterdeck, and it listed all the members of DE 413. So even though it was the centerpiece of our main deck quarterdeck, after we hit the mine and we were doing the things we were supposed to be doing, as we was walking by it, we would rub it, and it would like give us strength. You know, just one of those odd things, but it worked. So fast forward to the Persian Gulf in 1987-88, when we did our first deployment. The Persian Gulf was not a good place to be. Iran and Iraq had been fighting for 8 years, and they used the Persian Gulf as their shooting range. Iraq would come into the Gulf with their F-1 Mirages and just attack any shipping they could find. Iran would come out with their their log hammer speedboats and their Iranian frigates, and they would attack innocent shipping. They didn't care what nation it was. If they could attack it, they would attack it. And on May 17, 1987, the USS Stark was hit by 2 X missiles from an Iraqi jet, and it killed 37. One of those killed was Jeffrey Sibley from Metairie. He was a Grace King High School class of 1983. And if I forget, remind me to talk about the Stark whenever I get into our part of it. So, in the Persian Gulf, there were 3 different operating areas: the Southern Persian Gulf, Central Persian Gulf, Northern Persian Gulf. And, you know, different assignments. Normally, on an average day, there were 9 attacks a day in either one of those operating areas. Our captain was in the tail end of Vietnam, and he actually was part of the riverine force, so he knew what it was like to be shot at. And he told himself that if he ever had command of a ship, he would never let his crew not be able to protect himself. So whenever we entered the Gulf in February of '88, we made sure that the Iranians and the Iraqis knew, don't mess with us. If you come within our buffer zone, we will fire on you. And they knew it, and they didn't try us. So whenever we would patrol an area, there were no attacks. Iran didn't really like that we were interfering. They had 2 frigates. They weren't as big as our ship, and they were very nasty. They would go out and attack an innocent ship, and on Channel 16, the International Distress Frequency, they said, "Oh, by the way, have a nice day." And captain of that ship had a nickname, Captain Nasty. So they planted a minefield just for us. On the left there, that is their LST. I took that picture earlier in our deployment. We were cruising. We just dropped off a convoy in Kuwait, and we were heading back down towards the Straits of Hormuz to pick up another convoy. On the front of our ship, we had a mine lookout. The entire time we were in the Gulf, we had somebody in that chair looking out for mines. So we were cruising about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he reported to the bridge, you know, I see 2 mines. Well, we had a lot of false sightings in the Gulf for mines because the Australian ships would go to the Middle East a lot carrying, you know, a ship full of sheeps. Well, as they would die, they would throw them overboard, and the sheeps would blow, turn upside down, and their legs would be sticking up and it looked just like a mine. So we'd seen a lot of those in the Gulf. So that's the first thing we thought. But then, of course, this is the picture of the actual 2 mines that we saw, so we knew immediately after we saw those that it wasn't. So, Captain went, sent us all to general quarters, and he started backing out. You know, the safest way to get out of a suspected minefield is the way you came in, because it should be safe. Well, these mines were submerged, so we never saw the mine that hit us. So we hit an underwater mine. It was a Type MO8, typical of what you would see in a World War II movie. I think it cost $1,500 to make. It went from a 4,500-ton ship to a 6,000-ton ship in 2 minutes. I'm getting more into the damage in the next presentation, but this is just some brief pictures. I mentioned the Stark earlier. One of the things that we did was train. Okay, when the Stark was hit, there was a lot of lessons learned from their attack. We took those lessons learned and we took them to note. We took them to heart. So a lot of the things that we learned from the Stark is what saved us the night of April 14th. A perfect example is firefighting. We were on fire, but the fires were really controlled. And the captain was on the bridge talking to the XO, and water was coming down from the overhead, from the firefighting up topside. And it dawned on him, we're at Stark all over again. We're sinking ourselves, because we were sinking a foot a minute. I mean, a foot an hour at that point. And he's like, we're sinking ourselves. So he remembered the Stark, and that's what almost sunk the Stark, was them fighting fires that didn't exist, basically. And the XO basically said, are you, other words, crazy? He's like, no. If we don't stop the sinking, the Persian Gulf is going to put the fires out for us. So then we won't have to worry about it. So that goes back to learning, seeing other people's mistakes and learning from them. There's an old saying that all Navy regulations are written in blood. And the reason that is for the start. 37 people had to die, but we learned the lessons from that, and it saved the 232 that was on our ship. So I got a couple little videos. One of our officers, he had a little portable tape recorder, and as soon as we hit the mine, he put it in his pocket and he recorded. So when the captain did some reports over the 1MC, he's actually got recordings of it. So this is actually our captain giving his first report.
To improve the stability of our ship, the flooding is being pumped out at AMR 3. We found a hole in AMR 2. The engineers have shorted up. Progressive flooding has been controlled, and we are righting the ship again. Keep your heads up. We're doing a good job. Coming to the minefield is. And I'm not really excited about having two ships come in and have the same thing happen to them as happened to us.
One quick note there, you just saw the quick glance of the minefield. The EOD team, the next day, found 12 additional mines in the minefield.
So we're going to have to hang in there like Santa Leone's guys and fight this thing on our own. We're doing fine now. Keep charging, keep your heads up. Anybody who feels fatigued, up to the decks with any debris that might cause somebody to slip or fall on your head, clean up the missile hazards, and make sure we have a safe platform here to continue our damage control fight. That is all.
Have y'all ever heard the word missile hazard? On a ship, almost everything has to be tied down or secured. And if it's not, like whenever we hit the mine, it becomes a missile hazard. So if it's not tied down and you're sitting in a room with it, it could hit you. So that's what he's talking about there about missile hazard. This next one is, so that night, I think it was about 5 hours that it took to put the fires out, stop the flooding, and this was the next morning.
First of all, let me thank every one of you for a superb job yesterday in saving a ship that at one point was on the verge of not surviving. Well done to all hands. Second item is we are presently still at General Quarters Stations, more or less, and we need to stay that way. Let me be frank with you. Santa Lee Roberts is still in a lot of danger, and depending on how serious our damage is, we may have to abandon ship on very short notice. So stay on your toes. We're not out of the dark yet. Just so you all on the baseline of the damage, the main engine room and AMR 3 are totally flooded out. I don't know how severe the damage is in the main engine room, but I believe that we probably have a hole in it, and I'm not sure there's anything left of our lower level. Mainly because there are certain parts of our lower level sitting above the gas turbine.
One note there is, Captain really didn't know what was going on in the engine room. The main engine room was the biggest space on the ship, probably 20, 25 feet high, and it was like 2 different levels. And what you see here, there was this catwalk that separated levels. So a lot of the equipment, what he was saying, that was on the lower level was in the overhead of the above level. That's how massive the blast was. But we didn't know any of this because really this is the only thing we could see. We couldn't get into the engine room because it was flooded.
Engines in the upper level. In AMR 3, I believe we also have a hole in the hull. I don't know the extent of that damage, but we have been pumping with 5 adductors all night long in both those spaces, and it really made no progress. We were just hung our own. AMR 2, is intact. We had some holes in the bulkhead. I think that
This picture here is the deck above the engine room. And talking about the equipment that was coming up, as you can see, all of the indentions, that's from the equipment hitting the overhead below that.
damage control effort was superb last night. Shored them up. Blocked up 95% of the holes. We have just slope leaking in there. We have dewatered that space 99%. She's okay. The diesels in the space are operating fine. We're okay at this time. Well, number 3 diesel we've had to shut down because of lube oil leaks. Everything aft of AMR 3 is intact with no damage. Everything forward of AMR 2 intact with no damage. We have a crack at frame 250 in the superstructure that goes from one side of the ship to the other. That does not affect the work.
So this next one is that night. So April 14th, we hit the mine about 4:45 in the afternoon. They fought throughout the night. I was not on board that night. After we hit the mine, I was inside the helo hangar right inside here. So it was pretty much right over. I wasn't really injured when we hit the mine. I worked for about 2 hours, working party, basic stuff, and my body just shut down on me. I know now that I was dehydrated and heat stroke, but at the time, I had no clue. So I wasn't on board that night, or this time where he's talking about now. So pretty much that night, they saved the ship. Friday, April 15th, ocean-going tug took us in tow, and this is the night, that Friday night, when he's talking.
First of all, let me thank every one of you for a superb job yesterday. As we sit here tonight, we're down to 17 in the stern and about 12 feet forward. And we're making our way to Dubai, and we're going to get there. We're going to turn to 187 miles. We're going to make sure our shoring works, that our pump works. And we're going to bring this baby home to the United States Navy and to the people back in the United States. Because we're a great Navy, and we're going to show them that this is what we're all about and what we can do. That we're professionals and we're tough. And I'm very proud of the men on this ship tonight and what we've been through. And I think they're very proud of themselves and they're proud of their Navy. And they see what they've done here tonight with a great sense of pride. As Samuel B. Roberts sailors, they're proud of it. And we're going to make it all happen.
Aboard ship, the impact of the blast dented bulkheads, cracked seams, and twisted metal.
What you're seeing over here is what used to be the controllable pitch propeller oil distribution box, the CPT sump heaters, and some other equipment that used to be on the engine room lower level about 20 feet below us. The mine hit in between the 2 gas turbine modules here, and the blast forced all the machinery up into the overhead of the engine room upper level. It also ruptured 2 fuel oil tanks and the main reduction gear oil sump. When the blast hit, we had 4 people inside here. All of them received burns, cuts, bruises. One man was trapped underneath the deck plates here.
I'm going to talk about this right quick. I said there's 4 people in there, the gas turbine. This ship wasn't the old type World War II with boilers and all. This had gas turbine jet engines for the propulsion. Chief Alex Perez was thrown, he was on this upper level when we hit the mine, and he was thrown over into the water. He was yelling out, and you got to remember this space is it's flooded over halfway and on fire. And we had 5 guys hurting, screaming, and they ran into it. The water, he basically was like this up on the grating, holding on, and he had a broken back. Well, they tried to get these gratings off, and these are held down by U-bolts. So the bolt is actually underneath, which they couldn't get to. So after trying it for a few minutes, they searched another part, and there was about 15 feet away, they found a part of grating that had been dislodged. Well, they told Alex Perez, okay, we're going to put a battle lantern down in the water, over here. You got to swim on. You got to remember this place is on fire, and this fuel oil. It's not just like swimming in your pool. So you got to swim under this equipment and go to the light, and we'll get you out. And they did. And it is one of the road things I've ever been associated with.
We had to try the deck plate off to pull him out before he was drowning.
Now this next little video I'm going to show is, I like to do it because it's humorous. Of course there's a lot of news events, you know, reporters want to know about us, so they did the typical interviews. Well, about a week later there was so much interest in our story that they wanted to do more. So the admirals came back and they did this quick.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the 5 hours to put out a fire. Were all these repairs going on while the firefighting effort was going on, or was the fire put out and then the repairs began?
I don't know factually. I would assume the answer to that is yes. They were performing damage control, which is what those repairs are.
This next admiral speech was actually our guest speaker at our commission in
They were backing out
1986.
of a minefield, controlling flooding, putting out fire, moving magazines, and repairing the ship.
And telling people in Washington what had happened.
How long it was before the Wainwright could get close enough to provide pumping equipment or what other types of equipment that they loaned?
A few hours.
What type of equipment was brought from Wainwright? Okay.
She asked how long the Wainwright would have taken to get there.
But nothing was actually
And
Wainwright.
we'll explain that in this next
Not
one.
as far as we know.
Once
Fire on its own, or did they take outside help, like the start?
I'm sorry?
Did the crew suppress the fire totally on its own, or did they get outside help, like at the start?
The crew suppressed the fire entirely on their own. I believe they had no outside help. That
They
was-
had people approaching the area and they warned them off, telling them that they were in a minefield, which in itself seems to make a lot of sense. And so they dealt with the problem on their own and did not want to hazard other vessels until they were sure they were clear of the field.
So the fuel.
Now after we hit the mine, Commander, about how much time we
We got about a little under 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, most of the last one I'll just skip through because that covered it. So after we hit the mine, they found the other mines, and we could trace the serial numbers back to Iran from an event in 1987. So President Reagan ordered Operation Praying Mantis, which is a retaliatory strike for mine nests. It was what's controlled a controlled response, so they weren't looking just to go out and blow everybody thing in the Gulf. There were two big oil platforms in the Gulf, Syria and Sasan, and the Iranians used these as a base of operations to attack ships. We knew about it, so we stayed around it, but Reagan said, take them out. So the goal was for today, destroy those two oil rigs, and if any of the two frigates from Iran, if you come across them, sink them. Don't go looking for them, but if you see them, sink them. So this was the Marines that were on the USS Trenton getting ready to go to one of the platforms. CH-46 took them. Before they landed, the Navy ships bombarded them with hundreds and hundreds of rounds. So they basically prepped it before the Marines got on board. Just a couple pictures. I mean, you know, this is a massive oil platform. That's from the artillery. So that's one of the guns that they found on there, which proved that it was a base. A6s from the carrier got involved, and this was actually the first time that they ever used laser-guided bombs in combat, and they worked perfectly. These A6 intruders were tracking speedboats basically and hit them. And one of the frigates, both of the frigates came out of port after the battle started, which surprised everybody. And this one here, I believe it was the Sabalon, took 6 harpoons and then went to the bottom. This is what I call the best audio clip ever. And just listen. And this was the Wainwright. Does everybody know what Channel 16 is? If you go out on boats, it's emergency, like if you get in trouble, that's what you would call on. So this is what they said over Channel 16.
This is a warning. Stop and abandon ship. I intend to sink you. Over.
I just let it go. I mean, it takes, no guesswork out of it. They told him point blank, we're going to sink you, so we're giving you a chance to get off the ship. The only loss that day was a Cobra helicopter. The pilot was Captain Kenneth Hill and Captain Stephen Leslie. They were attached to the Wainwright that day, and that night, or that evening, the Wainwright had a target on radar that was approaching them. So they wanted to launch the helicopters to investigate it. Our SH-60 Bravo helicopter was supposed to go with them because it had radar. Whenever they did the pre-flight, it was broke, so they couldn't go fly. So this Cobra went out without radar protection, which they're not supposed to do. Well, the pilots said, we're going to do the mission anyway because we have a danger approaching us. What I found out later on was Captain Stephen Leslie's wife was 6 months pregnant at the time of his death. She was from Baton Rouge. In 2014, she had a daughter, named her Stephanie after Stephen. This was at the World War II Museum, and this is where she received her first Gold Star pin ever. The gentleman that's pinning on her is Sergeant Major Brian Battaglia. He's also from Metairie, and at the time, he was the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, basically the senior enlisted member of the United States. And this was up the left, me and the pilot's wife, Lisa and Stephanie, and since then, Stephanie's had 2 sons. Her oldest son, she named Stephen after her dad, and then she just had another son, Jasper, last year. So, the Samuel B. Roberts legacy. How important is it? How big of a deal is it? In the 20th century, only 2 men have had 3 ships or more named after them. One was the Admiral Kidd that was on the bridge of the Arizona when it was sunk at Pearl Harbor. The second one was this 19-year-old kid, Samuel B. Roberts, from San Francisco. Another important note is, I haven't been able to verify this because it's too much data to try to Google, is all 4 parts of the Samuel B. Roberts story are combat veterans. Normally, you have a person like Lieutenant Michael Murphy from Red Wings. He had a ship named after him. So you had a heroic event and a ship named after him. Usually that ship just goes and serves life in the Navy and serves the world peacefully. Well, with Samuel B. Roberts and all 3 ships that were named after him are all combat veterans. And I have yet to find another ship or a namesake to where that's the case. So that's just a final picture. So he shows this 19-year-old kid from San Francisco, and he's had 5 ships named after him, and people that served on the ship that was named after him. That ends that first part. This next part is more about the damage, and since I showed the videos, I'm really not going to go into much detail. And please, anytime you have questions, let me know. This was the next day, and I told you that I had to be medevaced off the ship. Well, our SH-60 was on the Trenton by now, another ship being repaired. The CH-46 is what came in medevaced us. The problem was, as you can tell in this picture, that helicopter is too big to land on that helo deck. What they had to do is back into the ship and put the ramp down and the back wheels and basically hover while we were medevaced. And that sounds like a lot, but think about this. This was about 2 hours, 2.5 hours after we hit the mine. This is a ship that's on fire and is sinking and is still in a minefield. And these helicopter pilots had the nerve to do that. And hovering a CH-46 that low to the surface is not an easy thing. So that's why I wanted to share that picture with you. That's just a rude drawing. One of the things that really saved us from the mine blast was where the mine hit. It hit exactly under the main engine room. So the bulk of the explosion was vented up through the plenum chambers, the exhaust basically, and out the stack here. So instead of all that force being held inside the ship and destroying things, it was vented to the outside air. And it blew about a 150-foot fireball out the top of the ship when it struck. That just shows the fire damage topside. That's just going into the engine room. That's how high the water was. Showed you that already from the video. That's just, like all of this stuff up here you see was supposedly 20 feet below it. Showed you that. The shoring, our damage control teams were busy basically doing the flooding and all of that, the fires. We had other teams that were made up with other people from the ship. Like one of them was a guy I worked with, Gary Jackson. One was a cook. They all did other jobs on the ship, but their secondary job was damage control. And this is the shoring. This was in AMR 2, that one of the walls was it was cracked, so water was starting to come through. And if you went to the training facility or you looked in books, this is exactly what they would show you of what shoring is supposed to look like.
Just before you go on, what you're looking at there is all that wood is not supposed to be there.
Correct.
That's all stuff they built while water's coming into there to prevent that wall or that bulkhead from falling down.
And if this bulkhead, there's 4 main spaces on the ship, and 2 of them are flooded already. If this bulkhead gives way, we sink instantaneous. I mean, there's no slowing or anything. It's an automatic. If that bulkhead goes, we sink immediately. No abandoned ship or anything like that. And we had a lot of extra wood and stuff like that from the experiences from the Stark. That's just a picture of the hull. It's about 25 foot. If you know, it's not exactly circular. And that's actually from the scaffolding looking up inside the engine room from the hull. This is like the hull was on the other side of the ship in the middle. This was on the other side, and it pretty much just crinkled it just like an aluminum can. And so pretty much it was crinkled all the way up to the main deck, which is about where that line is. And the problem was, so basically everything below the main deck in that section was demolished from the mine blast. Well, everything from the main, this was the main deck here. Well, everything above the main deck had this crack going through it. And it wasn't just a little crack here or there, it went all the way through the ship. If it wasn't for all the cabling, you could have taken a big cable and went down all the way to the main deck from the top of the ship. Just another example of it. This is one of the pictures I love most because Bath Iron Works built our ship, and they were known for World War II building ships. The same was Bath built as Best built. And if you notice where the crack is, it's right beside a weld. So the weld held, it was the metal that broke. Just more that shows the crack all the way through. And we think the crack really happened when the ship settled back down, because we went up in the air and whenever it came back down, that's whenever we think it cracked. One of the things that we did to keep the ship from twisting like this was weld plates, aluminum plates across it, and we actually banded it together. Because that night there was a storm that went through and the seas were rough, so the 2 ends of the ship were literally doing like this, and you could hear it creaking. So one of the things, a lot of ingenuity that day, one of the things was, the screwdriver. Something as simple as that, because without the screwdriver there, the rope would just, slide off of it whenever they put tension on it. And the last thing is to show you how close we were. This is normal, like this is the back of the ship. This is about where the water level usually is, okay? And you got to remember, this was the next day whenever this picture was taken, and you can see how low the ship is in the water. And for 2 days until we pulled into Dubai, everybody had to sleep above decks. Captain wouldn't let anybody stay down below in case we did have to abandon ship. And that is it.